One of the main challenges is that as a leader, you feel like you're expected to give answers, to give directions. You're expected to know, right? And when you're adopting a coaching mindset, it's not about what you know, it's about how you facilitate the person you're coaching. How do you facilitate their process of problem solving based on what they already know, the skills they already have, and their experience. Because if they did not have those things, they would not be sitting in front of you talking about these issues.
Why did I become an executive coach? I saw lots of great people fail to get ahead at work, while their much less talented peers blew right past them. That made me furious, but also curious. What were great people getting wrong? It came down to helping them re-examine what drove success and then helping them make critical shifts, one hard truth at a time.
Feel like you're doing everything you were told, but you're not moving ahead at work nor having the impact you seek? Then welcome to 97% Effective with Michael Wenderoth, where we skip feel-good, happy talk and engage experts in pointed conversations about what it really takes to move the needle at work and your career. So if you feel stalled or frustrated, or seek that extra edge as you move to the next level, then look no further. This is the Hard Truths Playbook you never got.
Hi, I'm Michael Wenderoth, and you're listening to 97% Effective. When I became a coach, an executive coach, after a 20-year corporate career, I went through professional coaching training. And when I was exposed to those skills, I said to myself, hey, I used to do actually a lot of this as a manager and leader in my corporate career. But I also realized that many of those powerful coaching skills I learned and use to help understand, unlock, and empower clients, well, back in my corporate days, if I'm really honest, I really hadn't even scratched the surface of. Which has always made me ask, how come managers and leaders don't get taught coaching skills? My guest today, very excited, Dr. Inbal Demri-Shaham, has done just that. She's created a go-to course, Coaching Skills for Effective Leadership at Stanford University. Her course, created in partnership with Professors Maggie Neal and Sarah Soule, who's now the dean at the Stanford GSB, is evidence-based, compact, and highly practical. So in this episode of 97% Effective, we're going to talk about 1, why do leaders need coaching skills? 2, what effective coaching really means and looks like. And 3, most importantly here, how Inbal's work as a top executive coach led her to identify the need for the course, and how her other side, the PhD practitioner, helped her shape its design for maximum impact. The goal of our episode here is to have you leave understanding how coaching differs from what you're probably doing as a leader or a manager, and how that's going to make you more effective. And as always, a couple practical steps or things you can do and take back right to work this week. Dr. Inbal Demri-Shaham is the principal and founder of Q-Factor Consulting, Silicon Valley-based organizational consultancy that works with pioneering founders, C-level corporate executives, and top academics from around the world to solve their most pressing business needs and position themselves as leaders for the long term. She is also an instructor, facilitator, and executive coach at the Stanford University Graduate School of Business and the School of Medicine. And that is where I met her first, have worked and collaborated with her. So I'm really, really excited, Inbal, to finally have you on 97% Effective. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. It has been a while since we started planning this. I'm glad we were finally able to actually get it done. And thank you for that lovely intro. I appreciate it.
I know your course was a long time in the making.
Yeah.
Nothing gets through and gets out at Stanford that hasn't been well vetted. It is now out and released, and you've been getting some great reception. I want to talk a little bit about what some of that reception is, but let's start. You, PhD, coach, practitioner. Why the course? What led you to believe that coaching was so critically important for leaders today?
Well, it's interesting. You said, how come managers do not get training in how to coach effectively the people that they lead, essentially? And the question that popped in my head was, most of them don't get taught leadership skills either, right? Most of them just get promoted into leadership positions based on performance that is not necessarily directly associated with successful leadership. And specifically with the coaching, there are multiple angles I can take for answering these questions, because there are so many reasons why this should be included as part of leaders training. The main one, the top of head right now, is I do not know a single leader that I work with or that we're seeing around us in the news or that is not leading through complexity, ambiguity, and unpredictability. And the rate of all of those is accelerating in a way that has not happened before. And when you lead through such levels of complexity and ambiguity, it is pretty impossible to be hands-on with everything that gets done under you, right? By the people, by the teams who report to you. And so you need to be able to develop a level of trust, not just in people's intentions, but also in their skills and potential. You need to be able to see that potential, and you need to be able to develop it so they can take things and run with them while you are reassured that they will do the right things, and if they need help, they will come to you, that you were able to build that relationship. We've had about 200, a little over 200 people take the course now. And one of the things that we've come to realize is that what we're actually talking about is a practice of relational leadership. So coaching is a way of framing it that makes it more tangible, you can translate it into actions. But the big picture of it is relational leadership, which is one of the main ways that managers, that leaders need to lead right now because of the complexity I was talking about.
And that must be pretty exciting. And I'm curious, 200 people have gone through it. For you having designed it, there's always stuff when you put something out in the world, people interact with it in a different way that you intended. Is there just one that you would call out? Because you're very thoughtful of how you design things.
The interesting thing is it's exactly like that. You create something and then you put it into the world, and then it's up to how people interact with it. That's what eventually affects the impact, right? And so for a very long time, I stayed the person who actually reads people's assignments, because I wanted to see how the course is impacting them, what resonates most, what resonates less, and what they're doing with what they're learning. And one of the things that surprised me was one of our participants, well, now graduates of the course, wrote this lovely summary of his experience going through the course. He posted it on LinkedIn and tagged me, and it was just so amazing to read. And one of the things that caught my eye was he talked about expecting the people he coached, because part of what we have participants do is coach other people, using EFECT, using what they're learning to kind of practice. And he was expecting the people he coached to change as a result of his coaching work with them. But what he was not expecting were the ways that he changed as a result of using coaching. And to me, it's almost like a given, because I know what working as a coach has done for my own personal and professional growth. But seeing that someone else reporting it and the way that it impacted them, that was a surprising insight.
And a really interesting one. I will put a link to that testimonial, that reaction to the course, because it was incredibly powerful. Inbal, the words leadership, coaching get thrown around, and coaching is in an ascendancy right now. You can call yourself a coach without having gone through any type of certification or training. Just very simply, how do you want people to think about what is leadership, what is coaching, those two words?
Yeah. So It's easier to answer the question about coaching because it's a little more contained. Leadership is such a big thing, and I almost feel like any single definition I can give will not do a full service to what leadership is. The shot I'm willing to take in terms of defining leadership is that it's a relationship, it's a social process, a social contract that enables individuals to work together towards a shared goal that they would not have been able to achieve were they not working together. And even this definition, it is more complex than it might sound, because like literally each word in this definition I can take and break down into something else, but it captures the big picture of what leadership is. I see it as both a mindset and a set of skills that support that mindset, that bring that mindset into action. And then coaching, with this, I have a more, I guess, defined, bounded definition that I've come to adopt when I talk about coaching, when I teach coaching, which is, first of all, the main goal of coaching is behavioral change. People come to us as coaches to be coached because they want things to be different. And in order for things to be different, you need to act differently and think differently about what you do, right? So the main goal is behavior change. And when you coach, you try to help people unlock and unblock their potential to maximize goal-oriented performance. So emphasis here on the goal-oriented performance, right? It's not executive coaching. Maybe other types of coaching are different, but for executive coaching, the goal-oriented performance is key, because this is not just about making people feel good. And as you probably know, Michael, because you coach too, sometimes going through a coaching session does not necessarily feel good, because we go into, the crunchy stuff that people often prefer to avoid. But you need to kind of go through it and process it in order to be able to make the progress you want to make. So the goal orientation is important. And then I see coaching achieved through three main, I guess, processes. First is that coaching is a transformative relationship. So the shift, the change happens through relationships, through the relationship of me with the clients I coach and the leaders I teach with their employees, with that relationship. That's why I talk about relationships so much in the course, but also anytime I talk about the course. And then coaching evolves through conversation. That's the medium of coaching, conversations. And then it's a process, which means it evolves over time. That's how I think about coaching.
Fantastic definitions. I love both of those. I really lock into when you say leadership enabling.
Yeah.
I love that part, which is not used in a lot of definitions. And I know there are different schools of thought around coaching, but I think you've just laid it out there in terms of what it is. What did you find was like the biggest misconception you were trying to address?
Yeah. So one of the biggest misconceptions we've had to address with the course specifically is that people thought we were trying to train coaches, which is not what we're doing. This is not what there are enough programs trying to train professional coaches. What we are trying to do is teach leaders or help leaders expand their leadership toolkit to include coaching skills and a coaching mindset, right? Because again, if I go back to the definition of leadership that I'm willing to talk about as a single definition, it is about the relationship, right? It's about that social process that gets people to do what you want them to do to support achieving a mutual goal. And to do that, you could use as many tools as possible, right? The broader or I should say the bigger your leadership toolkit, the types of skills that you have at your disposal as a leader, the broader that toolkit is, the better positioned you are to lead through different types of situations with different people, solving different issues in different contexts. Because you can't, I think you and I talked about this at some point, that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So you can't just have hammers in your toolkit. And coaching is a tool.
Inbal, because you coach a lot of founders there in Silicon Valley, C-suite people in Silicon Valley, where the complexity, ambiguity, the fast moving is occurring. What would you say, as you think about the toolkit that people have, what's the more dominant one that most people that you encounter kind of come in with and they tend to over-rely on?
Ooh, this might sound surprising. It's a combination of two things. So the surprising part is self-doubt, which sometimes is not evident in how people behave. That's one. And then the other is the perception that they need to know it all and solve it all, or at least be able to solve it all. So you see leaders taking on doing or instructing or telling significantly more than they should, and I'm using the word should here on purpose, which ends up creating overdependence on the side of the employees, their teams, but then on the side of the leader, it creates immense burnout.
Yeah.
Which, if you're an entrepreneur, you're already working probably 200 times what a normal person would, or someone who's not an entrepreneur would. So that added burnout is just, I don't have a word to describe it. It's intense.
Because I imagine you're working with a lot of super intelligent alpha type leaders who can do those things, but over time that leads to the burnout. And like you said, overdependence where they're become either the bottleneck or their teams don't develop the skills and so forth to lead.
So here's the interesting thing, again, maybe surprising. Those, what you call alpha leaders, what actually makes them successful is when they're able to step out of their own egos and give the stage, give the limelight to others and to others' agendas and needs. So when they understand and they're willing to be flexible, to be agile with how they show up, that's what actually contributes to their success. Everybody knows they can show up as the alpha. They've seen them do it, right? And sometimes that's what they need to do. But if what you're trying to do is help someone going through a crisis of faith in their own ability to deliver something, showing up as the alpha is not necessarily the way to go.
You've been listening to 97% Effective with your host, Executive Coach Michael Wenderoth. If this interview is making you think, make sure to share it with a friend. Now, back to our interview.
As a practical example here, I think would be helpful. The coaching mindset and the coaching skills. Obviously, your course dives into this, but is this as simple as you're listening more, talking less, or what would be a quick way for people to know? Like, let me think back to my conversation I had last week with a peer. I really wasn't using a coaching mindset or skills there. I was more directing, telling, doing. Is there anything that someone could just look at and say, am I doing coaching now or not?
Yeah. So the speaking less, asking more is one quick strategy people can try to kind of get a sense of what happens when you engage with more of a coaching mindset. And what I talk about is coaching mindset for leaders. So a coaching mindset, which anyone who's gone through professional coaches training knows this, right? You hold the person you coach as naturally resourceful, creative, and whole. They're agentic. They're the experts on themselves. They know best how to solve essentially their own issues, and we kind of facilitate that process. So that's the coaching mindset. But leading with a coaching mindset incorporates two additional concepts. or two additional things, let's say. The first is having a growth mindset, which means that we believe that improvement comes with practice and intention, right? We intentionally practice the thing we're trying to get better at, and we improve over time as a result of that. And then a dual growth mindset, which is the belief that you can change not just yourself, but that you can also change your environment. And one example of that is job crafting, which has been widely researched in social sciences, right? And so to give a simple example of that, if I work at an organization and let's say I'm an HR partner in my organization, and I am exceptionally good and I really enjoy putting together events, team events. Even if this is not within the scope of my job description, I might volunteer to do that type of unofficial work for my team because it gives me joy, because I know I'm good at it, right? But in order to do that, I need to believe that I have the ability to have some flexibility. Like I'm doing this because I'm thinking about the edges, like the hard edges of a job description versus like taking them and kind of massaging them a little bit so they're more flexible. So that's job crafting. And when we coach others, when we coach others as leaders, when we are leaders and we're coaching other people, we need to believe that, first of all, we have that flexibility within the scope of our role as leaders to use coaching. And we also need to have the belief that the people we coach have that flexibility within the scope of their jobs to craft that job to better fit their strengths, their passions, what motivates them, and allow them to do that. So a coaching mindset, just to kind of put it all together, means that you hold a dual growth mindset and a coaching mindset simultaneously. And you hold them not just for yourself, but you hold them for your coachee as well. You see them in the same way as well.
Dual growth mindset. I hadn't heard that term before.
Justin Berg. I highly recommend reading his work.
Oh, it's Justin Berg's. Okay. I really like that because I think a lot of us are familiar. It almost becomes a cliche, the growth mindset, although it's very fundamental, which gets me, as you talk about this growth mindset and coaching, Inbal, I also was coming across, I'm now blanking on, where the idea was coming from, but that the growth mindset is different than what you were referring to with dual growth mindset, but it's this idea too that if the organization or the environment is not supporting growth mindset or let's say coaching, it may be very difficult, right? Like a plant could grow anywhere, but it has a real time hard growing in a resource
strapped environment,
weak environment. Yeah. And so how much also is important, let's just take some of our clients who maybe work in the most toxic, non-coaching, top-down environments, right? We don't have to name companies. Yeah. There, if you try to bring some of this stuff in, and I have clients who said, I try to do that, and around me, people are like, just tell them what to do, right? Tell them what to do. So it's great, not a great environment to try that or even gives support to that. My question here is, how much does the environment have to support the willingness for leaders to be using coaching?
That's a great question. I guess my answer is it depends. It depends on the scope of influence you want to make or you want to have, right? So if you're operating in an environment that is so structured, and I have to say, I know what you're talking about. I don't know that there is a company or an organization where the environment is so constricting that you can't do anything, right? Even plants adapt. Maybe we learned from plants how to adapt. But so I would say, first of all, understand the scope of what is within your influence, and then set your goals and help the people you coach, help them set goals that take that scope into consideration. First of all, because you don't want to create a situation where people try and fail and try and fail and try and fail, because ultimately their motivation is going to erode and they're going to stop trying, right? So you want to create opportunities for success and these small wins. And as I'm saying that, these small wins are precisely the type of occurrences or events that kind of start pushing back or creating cracks in those limiting boundaries. Okay, so I, you know me, most of the people listening probably don't, right? I'm a rebel at heart, but I'm a very gentle rebel, right? I know when to push back and I know when to hold off. And so I don't want there to be a perception that if you work in a very limiting environment, that means that you become limited. I don't want people to get that impression, because yes, you have to operate within a certain set of rules and boundaries, and there's always room for creativity even within boundaries. In fact, many times creativity comes from restrictions.
Yeah.
I recently read again the book A Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl. That's an extreme example of how extreme circumstances foster certain types of creativity. But I'm giving this example on purpose because in any situation, no matter how limited you feel the situation, how many limitations the situation puts on you, your spark is not in what's outside of yourself. It's in what you can create despite these limitations. And again, like, that's one of the essences of coaching, right? Seeing through limitations to what is possible.
I know you fairly well. A lot of what you talk about, getting people to be more agentic and
Yes,
looking for
exactly.
areas. Yeah, that goes right to your wheelhouse, and I'm glad you brought that up. Inbal, to bring this down to earth, in your course,
Yeah.
you've created a memorable, simple framework that leads people through this coaching mindset and critical skills. Again, I'm glad you brought up the point. You're not trying to train coaches.
Yeah.
You're trying to give leaders this extra dimension that they may not be tapping on, that's going to make them more effective, particularly in today's environments at work.
Yeah.
So to at least share here, at least at a high level, what is that EFECT framework? And then I want to ask you a couple questions about it, because you're very deliberate in your design. So I want to hear
I am. Yeah.
and talk about
And I
that.
try to be very deliberate with the words I choose, because I believe that words create reality. So EFECT is, I think about it as a framework that actually it's descriptive. So EFECT came out of practice. It's research backed, but it did not come up through research. It came up through practice. And it's a distillment of what I have observed to be the infrastructure of successful coaching conversations. So you can take EFECT is a process. You can take EFECT and superimpose other coaching frameworks or coaching models onto it, and it will still work, because it's the blueprint of a coaching conversation. And it's a circular process, which means that you kind of go back to the beginning. So every conversation builds on the previous one or the one that came before it. So it's kind of like an upward going spiral. And it always begins with building the relationship. Because coaching is a relationship, because change through coaching happens in relationship, because as human beings, we change in relationships. We come to know who we are in relationships. As I said, I think I said this before, right? That first stage, engage, when you create the coaching relationship, that's one of the stages I talk about the most. If you have a good relationship with the person you're coaching, and I'll say what I mean by good relationship in a second, then even if you falter in the subsequent stages of EFECT, you will still be able to make progress, and it will still be a meaningful coaching conversation. So when I talk about a good relationship, it means a relationship where there's trust. So the person you're coaching trusts your intention, trusts that you have their best interest in mind, trusts that you have the skills to help kind of guide them through this process of figuring out whatever it is that they want to figure out. Some people refer to this as psychological safety, but I think psychological safety goes even beyond that. And then once you have that in place, you set some agreements, right? How do we want to be with each other? What is the contract between us? What are you helping me to do? Like me, the person being coached. What is this coach going to help me do? How are we going to interact? How often are we going to talk? For how long? All of those like contractual elements are part of what sets the relationship, because they define the boundaries. They create the container for the relationship. And when we know boundaries, we feel safer, because we know kind of like the rules of engagement and kind of like the playing field we're playing in. And then once you have that in place, then the next stage of EFECT is frame, which is the stage where you frame the problem or the issue with the coachee. You help them frame it in a way that is conducive of thinking about potential solutions. Very often, the way we frame an issue or we frame a problem or we frame a question limits how we think about potential ways of solving it or resolving it. Right. Many of our participants actually in the course report that they spend more time on this stage on frame than they expected to, in part because of this. You need to get to a clear definition of the issue, clear enough that the coachee feels that they're ready to move on. Because if it's not clear enough to them, they're going to continue circulating back to it, which is okay as well, because some issues need that circling back. Right. So if someone is just as an example, we're just working with people who are implementing a huge shift in HR systems. They're completely revamping the HR software that they're using. This is a huge change. And if you're an HR person, for you, it's like night and day, right? Because this is the core of your job. And so framing the types of challenges that they're going through as they're helping others and themselves implement this new system is really critical to their ability to feel agentic, right? I actually understand this challenge and I understand it in a way that leads to action or can feed into action. So we end up spending a lot of time on frame. And then once that is sufficiently done, we move on to explore, which is the stage where you help your coachee explore potential courses of action. What are some of the things I can do that can help me work through this issue, solve this problem, get through this challenge? And the idea is to help the coachee expand their perspective as much as possible to consider a lot of different potential courses of action. And for each of these courses of action, what are the potential consequences? So if I do this, what might happen? So yes, maybe I will get the result I want to get, but what else might happen? Is this going to lead to some interpersonal tensions with X person? Is this going to create issues with another team? Is this going to create issues with my boss? Right? So you kind of work through those as well. Commit. The next stage of EFECT means choosing a specific course of action, doing the action planning process. What are you going to do? When are you going to do it? Who are the stakeholders? Who do you need to have involved here? Do you have all the knowledge? Do you have all the resources? How are you going to get those in order to implement the course of action that you chose? And then finally, test it's mostly the coachee going out and actually implementing that course of action. And I like to call it, it's a hypothesis testing stage. That's why it's called test, because you're testing the hypothesis that the course of action you committed to in the previous stage of EFECT is going to lead to the outcomes you want. And you can't know until you actually do it, right? Until you actually enact that course of action. And then after test, we reconvene again and check in, right? What did you do? What worked? What didn't work? What are we going to talk about next? So closing that loop of effect and going back to engaging.
Super practical. And so the E at the beginning was establish, or I missed that.
Engage.
Engage.
So it's
Okay.
engaging with your coachee.
Yeah.
In a coaching conversation.
So engage.
Conversation, yes.
Yeah. Engage, frame, explore, commit, test. Beautiful to hear you talk about that, because I think, and also for those who may be coaches out there listening, many of us have been trained in different schools. I did mine at Columbia, and so we have our framework there. Yeah. Obviously, there's ones from the ICF, but thinking about, and I love the simplicity of how you guys have put that together. Again, you now have some data with people going through it. Yeah. You alluded to some people saying they spent more time on frame. Where do you find in this that most people feel like they need to do the most work or learn the most versus, this is something I already do? The follow-up probably at the end is what every manager is trained to do.
Yeah.
But these other parts, I'm curious, where are you getting, that's really interesting that they're finding that or struggling with that?
It goes back to one of your previous questions, which is you didn't ask it in this way, but you essentially asked about what do people find challenging about leading with a coaching mindset. And one of the main challenges is that as a leader, you feel like you're expected to give answers, to give directions. You're expected to know, right? Mm-hmm. And when you're adopting a coaching mindset, it's not about what you know, it's about how you facilitate the person you're coaching. How do you facilitate their process of problem solving based on what they already know, the skills they already have, and their experience? Because if they did not have those things, they would not be sitting in front of you talking about these issues. They would need to, right? If it's a technical issue that they're running against, they can probably solve it by finding a manual. I'm not talking about like a 3D manual, but there's a solution out there. They can find it. They would usually come to a leader. Well, they should usually come to a leader when it's a problem that needs discussing, that needs figuring out, that needs grappling with, right? And so one of the challenges is explore and frame, that transition between frame and explore, because helping someone define a problem, relatively easy for leaders because they're trained to think in these ways of how do I kind of narrow down on what is specifically the issue. They still need to hold back from making suggestions about what they think the issue is, right? But the explore, letting the coachee do their own exploration, and you just being the person guiding it and helping them expand their perspective without giving them solutions, without giving them answers. A lot of leaders find this extremely challenging. And one of the tips I tell them is something that you just mentioned before, which is talk less, ask more, right? Which helps kind of move them from their own agenda and what they want to achieve, which is show up competent as a leader, to focusing on the other person's agenda, on the coachee's agenda, and kind of try to see what would best help them. And sometimes giving an answer will help, just to be clear.
Yeah. So we're talking about here working on the leader to do this, but also I imagine some of the coachees need to be trained too of what this looks like, because a lot of times in certain settings, in certain individuals I work with, it's like you don't put forward, right? You defer to the most senior person in the room or your boss to tell you what to do. And so it sounds like this has a lot of benefit if everyone's understanding. And maybe this goes to your point of kind of when you engage, how should things work? My question here is, we're talking here about coaching for leaders. Yeah. It sounds like also those who are receiving the coaching also should understand
what to expect.
Here's what it will look like. And I'm, not just going to be told the answers. That in some organizations or some settings that may need to be integrated as well.
Yes, absolutely. It needs to be explicit. And that's part of the engage stage. So some of the things that our participants have reported doing, I'm not there present when they coach others. I get their reports about it. So some of the things that they've reported doing were I'm going through this course. It's part of my leadership development process. I would like to try this. I think this approach will be helpful here. I would like to try it. Are you open to it? Right. And that's exactly what engage is. You're contracting with the other person about how you're going to engage. What type of conversation are we going to have? What can you expect of me? What are my expectations of you? So definitely encourage people to be very explicit about, especially at the beginning, because again, one of the things that people report is that it feels clunky when you're just starting to coach. And professional coaches know this too, right? When you're just starting to coach, especially if you're trying to implement a framework or a model that's relatively newer to you, it feels clunky. You feel like you need to go through all of the stages. You feel like you have to go through them sequentially. And conversations hardly ever unfold completely sequentially, right? There's always like these small loops that happen during conversations, any conversation. So being explicit when it's called for. So if you're going into a conversation, let's say like a performance evaluation conversation with someone, or that you do once a quarter or once every 6 months, and you usually just go through the pages, right? There is a process, there are forms that you fill before, and then you meet, and then you just read from the forms what you've already written, and that's a performance evaluation conversation. And now you want to come in and you want to take more of a coaching approach and like identify certain pieces or feedback pieces in the performance evaluation. Then you want to kind of dive into deeper using a coaching mindset, using coaching skills. You definitely need to tell that employee, hey, I want to take a different approach here, and here is why. And the why has to do with them, not with you. Not I want to practice this, but I think this can really help you. I know you want this promotion. I think if we take this approach and look at this through using some different tools, I'd be better able to help you get where you need to get in order to get that promotion that you want. So again, notice it's the interpersonal contract, the contract for the conversation. The interpersonal contract, what I mean by it is that these are ongoing relationships. They're not single conversations. The relationship that a leader has with the person or the people that they lead is not like a one and done, hopefully, right? It's not a drive-by. It's an ongoing relationship when it's done well. I should caveat it, right? When it's done well. Yeah. And so when you adopt this coaching approach, you need to be a little more explicit at the beginning, but then it just becomes part of the relationship. And you use it when it's most helpful, when it will get you where you want to get, when it's the most effective leadership technique to use given the context, person, and goal.
As you're talking about this, Inbal, I think a lot of people, and certainly when I first came into coaching, they think of this as, and I'm going back to something you said I think is spot on here, right? Going from transactional to transformational mode. Yep. And the initial impulse a lot of people have is, well, doesn't this make things go slower because I've got to let them come up with the answer? Oftentimes they're closer to the answer, so they might. But do you find that this is sometimes you need to go a little slower to go farther? Or is that not necessarily the case?
So first of all, I want to say, and we talk about this in the course as well, coaching is not the solution to everything. There are times when a leader needs to give directions, when it's very high stakes, when the person you're talking to does not have the relevant knowledge, expertise, experience to do what they need to do. Telling them what to do is probably still the better solution. So coaching is not like how do you call it? Like a Swiss knife type of solution.
The one size fits all.
It's not. That's first. And then, yes, it can slow things down for two reasons that have to do not just with the person you're coaching, but that have to do with you as a leader as well. Because you need to shift your mindset. You need to change in order to help others change. And that change that leaders need to go through, reminding themselves, oh, I need to focus on this person's agenda, not mine. I need to avoid giving solutions. They overfocus, by the way, on what they need to not do. I wish they focused more on what they actually need to do, because it's easier to change when you focus on the direction you're going in versus what you're trying to avoid. And then you have the person in front of you, your employee who you're coaching, who now they need to figure things out, which takes longer than just being told what to do. But it's a slowing down that helps ramp up later. And the later is not much later. It's not like a year later. Most times it's weeks, like literally weeks. Because if you're getting someone in the habit of just being autonomous in how they think and how they problem solve, that goes a very long way in terms of fewer interruptions for you. And I'm giving this example because those are the examples that come up from the people who go through the course.
And I would just love to do a study that looks also at retention. We know that people leave companies because they're not valued, they're not listened to. Core of human drive is having autonomy, mastery over things, and a larger purpose. And it feels like the coaching approach, again, to your point, it is not in every situation that you'd use it, but that type of mindset and philosophy, it would just seem like it would lead to better retention, better engagement in organizations.
Engagement is the key word here, because when you have engaged employees, they are less likely to leave. They are more likely to be engaged with their work and with their colleagues and with you. They are more likely to deliver better results. They're less likely to experience stress at work, which is really important. There are so many variables that contribute to people's sense of well-being at work. And you can go, Gallup publishes this yearly State of the Workplace survey. They talk a lot about engagement. The results are pretty poor, I have to say. Workplace engagement is really low. It's improving, but it's really low. It's like in the low 20s, low to mid 20s. In the US specifically, I think it's a little higher, but globally it's around the mid 20s. Yeah.
Inbal, I feel like we're just getting started. And so I want to continue this. We're going to have another conversation and we'll wrap this episode here because I think we have covered what we set out to do, which was to talk about, why coaching is so important to effective leadership, what this course is particularly addressing, that notion you said of the toolkit that leaders have. And I'm honing in on engagement. Before we hop off and reconvene on our next episode, the show notes will have the link to the course. How do people reach you, see you? I know you've also been doing a lot of public speaking.
Yep.
What's the best way to reach you?
Honestly, right now, the best way to reach me is through my LinkedIn, because that's the place where I spend more time. If I'm not working, then I'm checking articles or some other people who I follow their work. And then my email, which I'm assuming you will publish as well. So those are the best two ways to reach me right now.
Absolutely. So thank you again. And for listeners out there, come back next week. We're going to dive more into this because we're just beginning to scratch the surface of Inbal's expertise. I want to talk about her work with senior women leaders, power dynamics, entrepreneurs, and again, how parts of that have also influenced the design of this course, as well as run through a little example. So see you next week.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Inbal.
Thanks for listening to 97% Effective, where we skip happy talk and help you break through and ascend one hard truth at a time. Help others discover this show. Leave a review and rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you like what you heard, you can get free resources, including the first chapters of Michael's book, Get Promoted, on his website, www.changwenderoth.com. That's www.changwenderoth.com.